Not likely. Then we've got someone cooking here on a grate.
They're completely fried, so as long as they don't get wet, they'll keep frying. And when they're ready to eat, they get separated out into the individual ribs and soaked in water.
Is that why they call them sticks?
Well, the next step is...
Well, when we get up the top here, hoping we're going to find our friend Joe. In fact, I can see our friend Joe away in the distance, so it'll be time for battle stations with me and Joe.
Ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who are interested, Wulfgar, wave Wulfgar. That gentleman is about to give a talk on Anglo-Saxon combat and blacksmithing. If you want to go and have a chat with him, he knows some stuff.
He's hopeless. I know. Where am I going to be able to stand so I can hear him?
So, you know, most of the war happens between children. Yeah, but this is technically almost like late road.
Hello!
On horse.
Hello, sir. How are you?
You're right.
Yeah, good, good. Yeah. You right?
Yeah, all good.
How's it going?
Yeah, very well. Just about to start a talk on smithing and combat.
And lucky. We turned up when we did.
Yeah, perfect. How's it going? You right?
Yeah.
Do you know who we are?
We're gonna. Good.
Anyone know who we are?
Saxons.
Do you know who they are? The other ones? Vikings. Does anyone know what that word means? Raiders. So sea pirates in a sense. So technically we're the original Vikings, really, because we were here first.
These are instruments of Saxon violence.
So yeah, so what we've got here is a couple of examples. I'm copying parts of a high status iron kit from the Sutton Hoo burial. Okay, this is so the Sutton Hoo cooking chain is a very high status piece of ironwork, and it's a mixture of lots of interwoven knotted links. Two different samples there. Okay. And as you can see, it's quite intricate. Okay, so with this you've got the smith at the time will be showing off their skills, and the people purchasing it with you're looking at the king, the Sutton Hoo king, is also showing their wealth. Now, these are just small portions of the Sutton Hoo chain. Okay, they're actually the easiest parts, and we have a thing called fire welding. Now, fire welding is when you work two pieces of metal, or the same piece if you want to make a link, so how chains are made. It's the hottest you get the metal at the hottest peak before it starts to burn, and then it starts to stick, and then you use your hammer to weld it into one, and it becomes one. That's how you join other pieces of metal together. Okay, we've got modern welding, but it doesn't replicate it, because welding, if you're not sure, it adds material, okay, and you've got to grind it away. With fire welding, it becomes one by the hammer and the fire. If it's not hot enough, it won't stick. If it's just too hot, it will burn. So you've got to get it just right. So fire welding is very essential. It's still very essential today, because modern welding can't replicate fire welding. So it's very useful still in the craft of blacksmithing. Okay, so we've got a little example of cooking utensils here. We've also got tweezers. Okay, the Saxons, we had toiletries, tweezers and things, and we have little ear cleaners as well that you'll see. Some of the ladies might have their toiletry kits on their belts. Okay, and Eburgar, you'll recognise his name in a minute. We've got he made this this belt buckle. It's actually from a grave in Alton. And I think also he actually made these tweezers as well, and they come from a grave in Alton as well. Okay, so we've got a little bit of cooking utensils there, chain work. Here's one of our helms. This was also made by Tom, whose actual Saxon name is Eburgar. Here you go. I was just saying these are from the graves in Alton, these two?
Yes, he's in grade 2. Yeah.
And another blacksmith of the group is Eburgar here. He actually made this replica, which is his helm. And where's this from?
It's from Wollaston in Northamptonshire. So a bit of mixed goods.
So if you look, I mean, there's a lot of sheet metal work here, doming, rivet work, and he's got his bore on the top. Okay, and when you start looking at helmets and some of the attire and any of our armour, so mail, it's not known as chain mail because that's if you look at the translation of chain, it actually means mail. So it's a chain, it's mail, if you say chain mail. So it's just called mail, the shirts. Our time period, to be authentic, is riveted. So tiny little rivets that hold them together. Now it's high status stuff, so if you've got mail, you are someone who has money, okay? So your average warrior would only have a sea axe, okay, which is our long knife. So that's a last resort weapon. You'd have a shield and a spear. We've got some mail here. Thank you very much. Okay. Oh, health and safety. So here we go. So these links, there's a 4-in-1 pattern, so 4 riveted into a plain link. Okay, so very good against slashing. However, our weapons, if we look at a sword, so our swords one-handed, but they're still broad. They're broad all the way up to the top. Okay, so these are designed for, although they'd have a razor sharp edge all the way across, all the way around, sorry, these are for crushing. Okay, you've got, with a mail, you'd have a padded war coat to work with the mail. They work together, you don't have one without the other. Later on at 2 o'clock when you see us fight, you'll see us in our gear. So with the padded war coat and the mail, it helps with absorbing the hits, only to a certain degree. At the end of the day, these broadswords are heavy for crushing the bones underneath. You're not going to all day you can cut mail, it's not going to get anything. So you're going to try and crush the bones underneath. So when we fight, obviously we're not out there to actually kill each other, but we're hitting certain areas that are easy to sort of work with. Normally there'd be areas you'll see us not hitting that in real life, you'd go full straight away. So smiths, you've got a little series of anvils here. I don't know if anyone, who knows what a blacksmith anvil, a modern anvil looks like? Anyone know? Quite large pieces of iron, yeah? So obviously you can't move that around as easy. So we had simple little stakes that we would have moved around with, okay? Here's a replica here, okay? So spearheads, cooking utensils, all can be made on things like this, okay? We don't need that much to move around. And at the end of the day, iron is very expensive, okay? Now to make mail, it's one thing putting it together, to actually have the material for this. This is a slightly larger version, so you'd have a smaller version of this. This is a bolster plate, a series of different sized holes. You would first have to get the material, so you're smelting the iron and you make it into billets. You heat those billets up, you pull them through the round holes and you keep heating them up, pulling them through, because when iron is hot, the way we work it, it's pretty much like plasticine when it's hot enough, right? You technically, theoretically, you could, if you could touch it with your hand, you could mould it when it's hot. Okay, so we get these billets, and they would have drawn them through the holes until they got to the thickness of the wire they wanted. Okay, so that's making the wire for the mail, and then you get a round bar. This one's a bit crooked, but you'd get a straight round bar, and the bar would be the thickness of the bar would be how the width that you want your mail links to be. So you'd get to that wire, which is a stage in its own to get to, and then once you've got that wire, you wrap it around these bars, and then you let them cool down, and then you chisel them off, and then you've got your separate links. Now these links are then squashed. They're overlapped and squashed. And then a tiny hole put through for a tiny rivet. Now it's a lot of work, it's a lot of man hours, However, it's for high status people that can afford it, and it does protect you really well from any slashing. Okay, so when you've got mail and a helm, our average warrior puts on about 2 to 2.5 stone extra on our bodies when we go out there. Now, that's looking at that. If we, I don't know if we've got, is the Alfred is his armour out?
My armour?
No, Eburgar.
Is your war face?
Yes, he's got it over by his Lombard stuff.
Okay, we've got a Lombard warrior with us. They are from similar areas where the Germanics are from, but he would have done a lot of work and moved around down. They took a lot of North Italy, around that area, and he's with us because he's of the same time period. Now we could have traded and crossed with people like Eburgar down there, which is why he's part of our warband. But if you look at his armour, it's plate, it's layered plate armour, and that's not only is it heavier than this, he's actually the heaviest member we've got. He's a good, almost, I'd say, a respectively 30 odd stone when he's got his equipment on. So when he's out there later, you'll see, you know, we put him in front when we want to push through the Vikings. And his helmet's the same as well. It's made of layers of plate armour. So there's influence. People think when they look at it, a lot of people tend to think of like Eastern influence. But that's because there would have been, you know, especially with the trading. I mean, the Saxons, we traded as far as past India. When you look at the garnets and stuff that we come back with, okay, so there's a lot of very advanced boat work, you know, to travel the seas and the distance that they travel.
About 2 stone.
So
about twice the weight the helmet was.
when you go past, you'll see his armour. It should be on a stand next to him. Okay, it's the plated armour. Okay, and he's our Lombard. Do we have any questions about anything? Anyone got any questions? Tough crowd. When is the battle? 2 p.m.
In the metal parts.
No,
So it's
about
about
that, no.
What are you using to make the hole? Because that would melt too.
It would have been iron. Yeah, but yeah.
By itself start to melt.
Yeah, it's got to keep it oiled. Doesn't my hands all dirty now
How
because
do
it's
you
been
do it
oiled.
without destroying the tool you're using?
So okay, so this would be hot, and the tool would be a punch, a round punch or a square punch. That would be
this one I
cold,
bought, so I didn't
and
make it myself,
you
so
know,
I would
as
assume
you're
it's
hitting it,
steel,
it doesn't
yeah.
really heat up much. You
Mild
take it
steel
out
is
and you
not
quench
coming
it
out
quick,
with
and then you
iron.
just
It
carry
would
it
have
through.
been iron.
Like to
The
punch
helmet
these
I
holes
did
would
make,
probably
and that is
take
made of iron.
probably one heat, to be honest. You know, you'd go almost all the way through, turn it around, pull your punch off, and then push it through. So it's sometimes it's quicker than drilling, to be honest. So yeah, you just got to look after the tools. They do heat up during the processes if you're not too careful. And if you get a punch stuck in and it's caught, and you let the actual whole area cool down, then your tool gets stuck because it does, it shrinks onto it. But you've just got to be quick, basically. What else have we got here? Spears. Oh, actually, I've got a question. What is the king of the battlefield as far as weapons are concerned? Who thinks what's the best weapon out there?
Spear, because it could be a sword, but a spear would be good because it can travel long distances. And
The early
even
Saxons,
if when
one of
it's
the
not
early Saxon
big,
warriors.
You're a Saxon, or are you a double agent?
No, definitely a Saxon.
Correct. The spear is the king of the battlefield, and because of distance.
Well, the
Let
Saxons,
me just grab a
the word
spear.
Viking actually means a raider, and it's actually an Old English word. But the
So a lot of
Saxons and
people,
Angles and Utes
some
first came,
actually,
they
I'm
did
quite
raid.
happy we heard
So they
spear
took
straight away
the
because a lot of
Viking.
people shout sword. Okay. Now, there's a lot of material in the sword. So again, you're talking about money. Okay. So I mean, for a male shirt that he's now wearing now, okay,
Right, okay.
you're in today's money a Porsche. I don't actually know cars, so that might be nothing to most people, but a very expensive vehicle of today. Okay, now the Lombard and his plate armour, you're talking about a manor house, a mortgage, to be able to afford that armour that he's wearing down there in our time period. So, so that's the same with sword. There's more material in the blade, so it's expensive. Okay. However, the spear, you've got the advantage. Now you should see this in the battle at 2 o'clock, the ones with spears fighting others. Now there are ways of working down, but if you are a good spear fighter, the odds are in your favour. I mean, we've got the distance, but we've also got 3/4 staff, right? They're using the back of the spear, which you don't see a lot of people do. Sometimes they just try to keep their distance, but you can put people off, and you can. It's very, especially with 2 hands. It's a different world when you've got a one-handed spear and a shield, because you're limited to what only one arm can do. Okay, but yeah, the spear is generally the king of the battlefield. And you'll see people work together. Okay, so and the smith would have understood how to use these weapons, because that's how they would have needed to understand how to use them, because they're making them all the time. So although I am one of the 2 blacksmiths in the group, I am also the Drighton, which is the war chief of this group. So you've got the king, he's the highest member, then there's me, and we've got high status warriors, which are called Yesifs, so we have close guards. So I've got a couple of Yesifs that are close guards. The Lombard is one of mine. I nabbed him straight away as soon as he turned up. All 30 stone of him. And the king will have Yesifs as well, and they're just close guards. They would have stationed themselves with them, and you might even now and then, if we walk around, and we might have to check up on the Vikes later to see that they're not going against their truce. The reason that we've allowed them to settle here this weekend is because they promised they weren't going to go attack and raid people. But you know, they might break that promise later on. 2 o'clock. So and they've got the equivalent for their high states people. We've got Jarls, and they've got their Jarl over there. So yeah, the blacksmith, we pretty much for thousands of years we were the person you went to make everything. Okay, if you're a woodworker, if you're a leather worker, you still had to go to the blacksmith. So they call it the king of all trades, because without the blacksmith, a lot of other trades couldn't do their trade. Unless you go further back and you start looking at the Stone Age time. But besides that, we were there, was central for everything really. Tools, weapons, armour, cooking utensils, it's all there.
Was it all iron, basically?
Yeah, so we do have ways, they did have ways of adding carbon for edges. But yeah, a lot of it's iron. Yeah, and the only reason mild steel now has taken over in today's age is because it's just that little bit more malleable. You can do a lot more with it, and it's not that much. It's 0.002% of extra carbon between iron and on steel.
Yeah, it's about 0.08%.
Yeah,
carbon in iron.
Yeah, so there's
up to about 0.25 in mild.
Yeah, so it's not a lot of difference, but it makes a lot of difference. If that makes sense.
Where did they mine the iron from? Where did they mine it?
Where they mine it from?
Yeah.
We think a lot of it was bog iron. So we think a lot of it was bog iron. There was a lot of bogs in the Anglo-Saxon period in Britain.
Yeah.
And you literally just go around with a bar and sort of keep clicking around in the bog until you hear a clink, and then you can dig down there and you normally get a little lump of iron. But you have to get quite a lot of it to get a small amount of iron.
Yeah. So is that Dartmoor somewhere or something like that?
All over the place. I mean, like Hastings, there used to be quite a big bog there, and yeah, so they're all over the place in Britain. Yeah, all around the coast.
But you didn't need to smelt it?
Sorry.
It was already pure enough to use, or did they?
No. So that was just bog iron ore. So it would have been iron ore, which is iron oxide. So you would then have to put it through a smelter to produce an iron. What's it called?
Ingot.
Not even an ingot. It's
No.
just like a slag lump, and then you sort of fold it and weld it, fold it and weld it. And
Get
by
rid of all
doing
the
that,
impurities.
beats all the impurities out, and you just get wrought iron. And then you rebake the wrought iron in a sealed container with charcoal powder, which then lets the carbon sink in and creates what we call blister steel, which is the kind of steel they had, about 0.8% carbon, so it's equivalent to a high carbon now.
And then that's going to smelt. How did the smelting that? What did that look like?
I haven't done it myself, but we understand they did have a like a large chimney furnace basically, and they could just feed in through the top. Lots of charcoal for the heat, bellows on the back to keep lots of air keep going through. I would assume it'd be a team of them, because with the bellows like this sort of bellows I had here to keep the air going through, you'd get quite tired quite quick. So yeah, there'd be a team of people on rotation, and it would take probably we did one at
Yeah, so I mean, I've done a modern version where we actually used an electric fan, and it still took the best part of the all day into the evening with constant electric air just to get enough to smelt. And we got a tiny block of iron from it, and so yeah. So I mean, I think you're looking at 2 to 3 days of constant rotation, and that's just to get, you know, and that's if you've got quality there. You know, you don't know what you're going to always get, and you've got, you know, as Eburgar was saying, you work at it to get rid of the impurities, and you've got to keep folding it, and you know, and that's why it's, you know, although there was more of it in abundance compared to the Bronze Age, there's still a lot of work to get to it, you know, and then all that work, all those stages is just to get the block. Then you've got to think, what are we going to make from it? So, you know, even something as simple as a hook, you know, you still got to go through all that process before we can then go, I'm going to make a hook now. So,
amazing.
Yeah. So
They did have a certain amount of control over the chemical compounds in it. Because, for example, on most of our swords in the period, they were pattern welded. So the edges would have been the blister steel, and the core was a mixture of high and low phosphorus iron. So you'd have an all iron core with a higher carbon edge. But the high and low phosphorus was made by adding pine wood into the burn when they made the iron, and pine wood contains a lot of phosphorus, which then goes into the iron. So phosphorus is usually an impurity nowadays in steels, but they had a lot of it in some of the core iron. Well, I don't know if they had the chemical knowledge, but they just knew that it produced these different metals, yeah, which acted differently when you're forging with them and smelting them, and yeah.
there we go. So, any more questions? It could be about anything, doesn't have to necessarily be about blacksmithing.
You mentioned the portability of the anvils. Would that have been more for repair when you're out on a trip or something? Why would it need to be portable otherwise? I assume it was
There's a theory that a lot of the smiths of the period were travelling smiths, because there wasn't enough, there usually wasn't enough work within one village to sustain a full-time smith. So the theory is they went around on like almost like their own territory, their own turf, whatever you want to call it, and they would have visited the same villages and over again to keep their business going. But then for the things like the swords, they would have been made by a weaponsmith as opposed to a blacksmith, and they probably would have been hired and kept by a lord somewhere on a permanent site to maintain weapons and armour of warriors.
Would there have been like a specialist iron ore gatherer then, likely? Miner?
Probably. Yeah. I mean, that may have been part of the travelling smith's job. He might have gone out to find his own ore to then smelt it, to then make all the new things he wanted to buy. But we don't know a lot about it, but it's current theories.
I guess he would have been vulnerable as well, because to be robbed or to be...
Possibly, yeah. I mean, there was part of the laws, as we understand it, was that every man was meant to carry a spear with him all the time. And it's just for self-defence, you know. So.
But each village would have had its own smelter then, presumably, if those were...
Possibly, yeah. I mean, we just don't know. We find bits of deposits all over the place.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to follow, like and subscribe to Kevin's Rambles.